Close your eyes and think about a woman who spent her entire life pouring herself out so others could be full. Think about the hands that never tired of cooking your favorite meals or tucking you in when the world felt too big. Now, imagine that same mother, 90 years old, standing on a sidewalk that's literally baking under a merciless sun. The asphalt is radiating heat so intense it's melting the soles of shoes, and her heart is fluttering like a trapped bird against her ribs. To the world passing by, she's invisible. She isn't a human being with a lifetime of stories, she's just an obstacle, a relic. Minor inconvenience, in the way of progress. I've spent my life on the fringes of the law, and I've seen things that would turn your blood to ice, hatred, greed, and cold-blooded betrayal. But nothing hits my soul like seeing a 90-year-old woman abandoned because she moves a little too slow. This is the story of Mrs. Halloway. 90 years old, and she carries herself with a quiet dignity that most people today couldn't even imagine. She's the kind of lady who still irons her handkerchiefs and wears a formal hat just to go to the pharmacy. Mrs. Halloway isn't just a resident. She's the foundation of this neighborhood. She saw these streets when they were nothing but dirt paths and wooden frames. Her late husband was a bus driver himself for 30 years, a man who lived by a code. He never missed a stop, and he never, ever left a soul standing in the rain or the heat. But since he's been gone, Mrs. Halloway doesn't drive. She relies on the city line to get to her doctor's appointments and fetch her heart medication. She trusts the system her husband helped build. Last Tuesday, the heat wasn't just weather, it was a physical assault. 95 degrees with humidity so thick you could feel it in your lungs. Mrs. Halloway was at the stop on 4th and Main, clutching her little metal pull, cart filled with groceries and medicine. She'd already been waiting for 45 minutes because the previous 2 buses had just blown right past her. By the time the next bus pulled up, she was swaying. The heat was cooking her from the ground up, and her vision was starting to blur at the edges. The doors hissed open. The driver, a guy half her age with a headset wrapped around his skull and a permanent scowl on his face, didn't even acknowledge her existence. Mrs. Halloway reached out, her old, thin fingers trembling as she tried to lift her cart onto the step. She wasn't asking for much. She just needed 5 seconds of patience. She looked at the driver, her eyes silently pleading for a moment to catch her breath and find her footing. But the driver didn't see a grandmother. He saw his digital display showing a 3-minute delay. He looked at his watch, then looked right through her like she was made of glass. "Too slow, lady," he snapped. "I've got a schedule to keep, and you're blowing my numbers." Before she could even get 1 foot on the platform, he hit the switch. The doors slammed shut right in her face. He didn't just leave her there, he floored it. The black exhaust cloud nearly knocking her flat on her back. He left a 90-year-old woman stranded in a death trap of heat, miles from home, with a heart that was already starting to fail. I was 3 cars back on my shovelhead. I watched the whole thing through my shades, and I felt that familiar, icy snap in my gut. I didn't chase the bus. Not yet. I pulled over, kicked my stand, and ran to her just as her knees were giving out. I caught her before she hit the concrete. "I've got you, Mrs. Halloway," I whispered, lifting her like she was made of fine porcelain. I carried her into the shade of a nearby deli, got her ice water, and watched the life slowly come back into her eyes. But as she sat there, apologizing for being a bother, my blood turned to liquid fire. I didn't call the police. I didn't call the city. I called the brothers. Because Mrs. Halloway didn't just need a ride. She needed to know that she is the most important person on this block. And that driver, he's about to find out that when you mess with our grandmothers, the Motor Mafia becomes your new schedule. If you think leaving a 90-year-old woman in the heat is a crime against humanity, hit that like button right now. Don't let these elders be treated like trash. Drop a respect in the comments if you want to see the Motor Mafia Escort. We gave that bus at the next stop. I didn't just sit there in that deli sipping water while my heart rate leveled out. I watched Mrs. Halloway's hands, those thin, paper-like hands that had probably held 1,000 babies and folded 1,000,000 loads of laundry, shaking as she tried to hold her glass. Every time she apologized for slowing down the world, a new layer of ice formed over my heart. I looked at Biggs and Hammer, who had rolled up within minutes, their engines still ticking as they cooled in the sun. They didn't need a speech. They saw the sweat on her brow and the empty bus stop, and they knew exactly what time it was. "Hammer, stay with her," I said, my voice sounding like a blade being sharpened. "Take her home in the truck. Crank the AC. Don't leave her until she's sitting in her favorite chair with a fresh glass of tea. Biggs, let's go find our friend." We didn't just ride after that bus. We hunted it. We knew the route. We knew exactly where that coward would be in 10 minutes. We caught up to him on the long stretch of 8th Avenue, where the traffic thins out and there's nowhere to turn. I pulled my shovelhead right alongside his driver's side window. I didn't yell. I didn't flip him off. I just turned my head and looked at him. I wanted him to see the reflection of his own fear in my shades. He tried to ignore me. He looked straight ahead, gripping the wheel, his knuckles white. He knew. He saw the Motor Mafia patches. He saw the 15 other bikes that had suddenly materialized out of the heat haze like a ghost army. We surrounded that bus. One bike in front, one on each side, and a dozen behind. We became his shadow. When he reached the next stop, he didn't have a choice. Biggs parked his bike directly in front of the bus, inches from the bumper. I pulled up to the doors. The driver didn't open them. He sat there, staring at us through the glass, his headset now hanging around his neck. He looked a lot smaller without a ton of steel and a schedule to hide behind. "Open the door, son," I said, my voice projecting over the low, rhythmic thrum of 16 idling engines. He shook his head, his mouth moving in a silent no. I didn't move. I just leaned my back against my seat and waited. The people inside the bus were looking out the windows, confused at first, and then they saw us. They saw the brotherhood. They saw the silent, heavy resolve of men who don't play by the city's rules when the city's rules fail the innocent. 5 minutes passed. 10. The schedule he was so worried about was now a smoking ruin. The digital display on his dash must have been screaming DLAY. But out here on the asphalt, time had stopped. Finally, the hiss of the air brakes echoed through the street. The doors folded open. I stepped onto the bus. The air inside was stale, smelling of old plastic and recycled heat. I walked right up to the driver's cage. He was trembling now, his eyes darting toward the emergency radio. "You were in a real big hurry back on 4th and Main," I said, leaning my elbows on the metal rail. So fast you couldn't see a 90-year-old woman dying in the heat. So fast you thought her life was worth less than 3 minutes of your time. I have a route! They fire us if we're late!" he stammered, his voice cracking like a dry twig. "Is that right?" I asked. I reached out and tapped the digital clock on his console. "Well, looks like you're 15 minutes late now. And you're gonna be a lot later. See?" Mrs. Halloway's husband drove a bus just like this for 30 years. He never left a soul behind. He understood that this seat isn't just a job. It's a responsibility. You're just a coward with a headset. I looked back at the passengers. Most of them were quiet, watching. "Does anyone here mind if we take a little detour?" I asked, because this driver is about to learn how to properly escort a lady. Not a single person complained. One guy in the back actually gave a thumbs up. I turned back to the driver. "Get up. You're not driving. Biggs is going to take the wheel. You're going to sit in the back. And for the next 2 hours, we're going to every stop on this route. But we aren't moving until every elderly person, every mother with a stroller, and every person who looks like they need a hand is seated comfortably. You're going to watch, you're going to learn, and then you're going to go to Mrs. Halloway's house, and you're going to apologize on your hands and knees. If you're ready to see this, professional driver get a lesson in humanity he'll never forget, hit that like button. We aren't just bikers. We're the protectors of the people the world tries to forget. Subscribe and hit that bell, because part 3 is where the debt gets paid in full. Drop INVERFAEGT in the comments if you stand with Mrs. Halloway. Biggs climbed into that driver's seat like he owned the city, and let me tell you, seeing a 6'4" biker with a grey beard and a Motor Mafia vest handling a 40-foot city bus is a sight that'll make anyone stop and stare. The driver, the schedule king, was relegated to the very back seat, sitting right over the engine where the heat is the worst. I made him sit there without his headset, without his phone, just him and the silence of his own conscience. I stayed on my bike, riding point, while the rest of the brothers flanked the bus like a presidential motorcade. We took that bus through every single stop on the line. At every corner, Biggs would bring that massive machine to a gentle, perfect halt. He'd wait until the doors were fully open, and then he'd step out. He didn't just wait, he helped. He lifted strollers. He held the arms of elderly men. He waited as long as it took for every person to find a seat and get settled. We spent 3 hours doing a route that usually takes 40 minutes. The delay on that driver's dashboard was now over 2 hours, but for the first time in his life, he was seeing the faces of the people he usually treated like shadows. He was watching from the back window as Biggs helped a woman with 3 toddlers get on safely. He was watching as the brothers cleared a path for a man in a wheelchair. I kept looking back at him, making sure our eyes met. I wanted him to see that the world doesn't end because you're 5 minutes late, but it sure as hell starts to rot when you stop caring about the person standing in the sun. When the route was finally done, and the last passenger had been dropped off with a "Have a nice day, ma'am," from Biggs, we headed back to Hillside. We didn't pull up to the bus depot. We pulled up to Mrs. Halloway's little white house. Hammer was already there. He'd done exactly what I asked. Mrs. Halloway was sitting on her shaded porch in a rocking chair, a fresh glass of iced tea in her hand, and a plate of cookies on the table. She looked like a different person. The color was back in her cheeks, and the fear had been replaced by a quiet, confused wonder. She couldn't understand why 50 bikers were parked in her quiet street. I walked to the back of the bus and hauled the driver out. He wasn't arrogant anymore. He looked small. He looked like a kid who'd been caught breaking a window. I marched him up those porch steps, my boots echoing like a heartbeat on the wooden planks. "Mrs. Halloway," I said, my voice softening as I looked at her. "I think this gentleman has something to say to you. And he's got all the time in the world to say it." The driver looked at her, really looked at her. He saw the 90 years of life in her eyes. He saw the kindness she still held, even after he'd left her to die in the heat, and he broke. He didn't just apologize, he started shaking. "I'm sorry, ma'am," he whispered, his voice thick. I forgot that people matter more than the clock. I was so worried about my job that I stopped being a human being. I'll never do it again. I promise you, I'll never leave anyone behind again. Mrs. Halloway reached out and took his hand. Her fingers were thin, but her grip was steady. "It's a heavy burden to carry, young man, the lives of so many people. My husband always said that a bus driver isn't just a pilot, he's a guardian. I hope you remember that tomorrow." I stayed on that porch for a long time after the bus finally pulled away. We sat there in the cool of the evening, the brotherhood lining the street, a silent wall of protection for the woman who'd seen this neighborhood grow from nothing. Mrs. Halloway didn't have much, but she had us. And from that day on, every driver on that wrote news. When you reach the stop on 4th and Main, you wait. You wait as long as it takes. Because the Motor Mafia is always watching the clock. People think we're out here looking for a fight. But the truth is, we're out here looking for the people the world wants to forget. We're the escort for the ones who can't run. We're the voice for the ones who whisper. And as long as my heart is beating and my engine is turning, nobody, and I mean nobody, is leaving our grandmothers behind. Respect isn't a schedule. It's a choice you make every single second. And on this street, we choose family. This is Jax, signing off.